Welcome to Homa Studio's Python for Beginners series, and we're just going to get set up in Visual Studio Code, go over data types just a little bit and some variables, just some basic addition and the print function, introductory stuff for Python just to get you set up before we dig in a little bit more. To get started working in Python, I'm going to review VS Code a little bit so you could feel comfortable working in the environment. Now this is the Mac version of VS Code, but it's very consistent with the Windows version. Now I have this launched and I have a welcome screen up here which I'm going to close, and I'm going to go up here to where they have the files and I'm going to click on that and it says open folder. Now it'll default to a folder that you already have open, but I close that up so that I can go open folder, and I'm going to open up HS Python. That's a folder that I already created and it had some introductory files that I used in some of the first videos. And I'm going to hit open, and that'll be my default work folder, and you can see it's displaying those files. And it has a welcome screen again, which I'm going to close up, and it has a terminal down here. This is your code editor once we start working on a file. And to work on a file, I'm going to hover over here and go to this new file icon, and I'll click on this and I'll make a file called math.py because we'll be doing a little basic math operations to start. So I'll create a file called math.py, and you should put the py so it knows that it's a Python file. And as we start in here, I'll just go over a couple things. We'll start with data types in Python, and some of the basic data types are a number, and I'll put a 5, and I'll hit return, and I'll put another number, I'll put a quotes, and I'll put a 2. That's actually a string, even though, I mean, this could be a word, it could be a number. As long as you put quotes around it, it means it's kind of a character, so it's the character 2. And then I'll put another one and I'll put 5.0, and that's called a float. And if you hover over these, sometimes I have problems with this first one, but if you hover over these, this should be an integer, which is a 5. This should be a string. You can see it's saying str. And if I hover over this one, this should say float. Wait, it's there. You got to wait for it. I thought it'd just pop up a little bit. There it is. There's the int. So we have int, string, and float. And even though they're all numbers, putting them in quotes makes it a character. This is an integer without a decimal, and this is an integer with a decimal called a float. Now, right off the bat here, before we do anything, I'll mention that this is an unsaved file because it has a circle. Once you see the X there, that means it's saved. So I'm going to do Command S on a Mac or Control S on Windows, and I'll save that. Now, everything's really tiny in here. I don't want to work like this with everything tiny, and you don't want to watch videos with everything so tiny here. So I'm going to go into my code preferences and open up my settings. Now they have settings that you can kind of change here in the GUI, or you also have customizations that you're going to be able to do. Now the first thing I can do here is I could go in here to autosave, and I could put it on after delay, and that means I don't have to keep saving it every time I run a file. So I'm going to make sure I put on autosave here. That'll help you out a little bit. So I'm going to save that, and that'll keep it in kind of a saved state as I'm working on it. So I also want to go to text editor. I'll go down here to font, and I'll change my font size from 12. I'll put it up to like 18. Now whatever's more comfortable for you, but for recording videos, 18 should be a little easier to see when I'm recording. So I'll put that in there, and you can just close up your settings when you're done. You can see that's bigger now. And when you want to run a file, let's change this a second. Let's get rid of this. Let's just make this a 2. And what I'll do is I'll just add these together. Now, if I just add these together, if I just do 5 plus 2. Now, first of all, I'm rewriting these numbers, which kind of goes against the principles of using variables, which we'll do. But I'm rewriting these. And if I go in here to run the file, I could go down here and I could say Python or Python 3, whichever one I need. And then I can basically do math.py. Now that's in this folder. It's in the HS Python folder. And if I run it, I could just type that out just like I would in terminal, hit enter. Now nothing's showing up. That's because I'm not outputting anything right now. If I put this in a print function, a built-in Python print function, I could just put that in parentheses, and then I could go down and do the same thing. Now instead of typing this again, I could hit my up arrow and hit return, and now it prints out 7. So it's now printing out those numbers. And as we're going to be introduced to variables a little bit, let's just say x equals 5, and let's say y equals 2, just like algebra. And instead of rewriting these, we'll just put x plus y. And then we'll print out the value of x plus the value of y. So now if we run this again, I'll just hit my up arrow and hit return. It comes out to the same thing, but now we're using variables. And you could even take it one step further. I'll put an A here, and I'll see A equals x plus y. I'll just copy this. Now, I don't need parentheses up here, but I do need parentheses here, and I'm going to print out A. So I'm printing out the representation of x plus y. So now I have a variable. I have a variable that represents 5. I have a variable that represents 2. And I have a variable that represents x plus y. So I'm using variables inside a variable, which is fine, because then you can update these numbers and everything else gets updated. Everything gets recalculated. So if I ran this again, I get 7 again. So everything's working. We're just adding 5 plus 2. That's not a big deal. But the big deal here is that this is really tiny and hard to see. And if you want to change this, there's not an easy place to do that in your settings. So if I go to Code Preferences and go into my settings, if you look around for terminal stuff, you'll see some things, but you won't see size. So what you can do, if you go up to this thing, these little curly brackets here, it'll open up the settings JSON file. And you can see I already have the editor font size to 18, and the autosave feature is listed here. I already looked this up. I already had done this, so you have to kind of look it up to find it. But in order to help you out, I actually have this in a little text file, so I'm going to copy this. And this is for the terminal. This is a little bit harder to find. So I'm going to put a comma here. And notice between each item there's a comma, and it says terminal integrated font size, terminal dot integrated dot font size, 18, and then it has a comma, and then it also has this workbench color customizations, and it has a separate little curly bracket in it that's within the larger curly bracket. The settings have one big pair of curly brackets. They're not big, but one set of curly brackets. And some of these have kind of subsets of curly brackets, and the terminal foreground color is one of those that does. And there's color customizations that you can look up, but the only thing I wanted to change was just the color, make it lime green, kind of like the homebrew in my Mac terminal, and make this bigger too. So you can see already how this is a lot bigger down here, so this looks better already. So that's all you have to do in here. I could post that, so if you wanted to copy that. And also, I'll close this up. Be aware there's user and there's workspace. So if you're the only user, you could just use your user settings in here, and that's fine. But keep in mind there are two types, the workspace and user, if you have multiple people working on that. And again, if you ever need to edit that file, it's these little curly brackets here. And I'll just close this up. I'll close up my settings, and I'm back here. Now that looks a little bit better. So I'm just going to hit New Terminal. I'll do Python, and I'll do math.py, and I'll hit Enter, and there's my output. Now, I can also do Python 3, and I'll show you the difference between that. Another thing I'll also show you is you could right-click here, right in this area here, just right-click and do Run Python File in Terminal, and it'll run the file in the terminal as well. You'll see this address here of your actual Python that it's using, which is fine. So that's probably quicker than typing that. I think we're going to stop here. I'm going to keep continuing with this file because there's a lot of things we want to do with this other than just adding 5 and 2. But just to get you set up in VS Code, we opened our folder. We created a Python file by using this thing. We changed some settings so this is bigger. We changed some settings in our JSON file so that this is bigger and it also has a lime green color. And we're going to do more with VS Code, and we're going to do more with Python. So let's take a break here, and we'll continue with Python variables and Python operators.